Hi, have you been wondering how to use modern tech to boost your business profits? Or you're passionate about tech and eager to dive into opportunities like remote work or professional networking? You're in the right place. Welcome to Digza Podcast. My name is Samuel Achatu Bashir, the founder and CEO of Digza and a seasoned senior software engineer. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe. On this episode of the Digza podcast, we'll be having Joy as our guest. Joy is a business strategist and an economist who has passion for technology. She has been in the tech industry for over 10 years. Joy has huge passion for working with startups. She works with the government, Nigerian government to be precise, to set policies that will enable startups to thrive. I and Joy will be talking about some of the policies that the government have set in place and how it has affected or enabled startups in Nigeria. We got to talk about some other policies that other African countries are setting to create enabling environment for businesses in their countries. We also talked about some of the challenges that startups are facing in this part of the world. We talked about innovation and other interesting topics. I believe you'll learn a lot from Joy on this episode. If you have any thoughts, any questions, feel free to drop it on the comment section. And if you love this episode, give it a thumbs up. Hi, Joy. I'm excited to have you on our podcast, Digza Podcast. We really appreciate um, you honoring our invitation to be part of this podcast. It's really cool, and we thank you. We'd like to start by maybe getting to know a little about you. Maybe you could just introduce yourself, and then we could get started from there.
Okay. Thanks, Dexter and Chato, by the
Yeah.
way. Nice to be here. And, I think it's always, for me, it's a reflective point to be able to share thoughts. Hi, everyone, or anyone listening. My name is Joy. And at the core, what I do is I support startups. I used to actually support startups, but now you'll find me at the intersection of public sector work, governance, and startup operations. So I think technology is important. I think it's I think it's a key factor that can move the highest number of people out of poverty. So I think the roles of startups are important. Startup technology is important, but more importantly, I also think that government have a huge role to play. So you're going to find me and the work that I do around that space, the funding, supporting funding, the policy side, and well, very early in my career is still early, so I'd say much earlier in my career, a lot of advisory and operation support. So that's summarily what I do. So I'm happy to talk about it or share the thoughts I have.
Yeah, I'm super excited to know that you've had experience working with startups, helping them to get funding and all that. And you mentioned that building startups goes a long way in helping a lot of people, come out of poverty, creating job opportunities and all that. I would like to start by asking you, when it comes to innovation, what are some of the challenges that you feel startups are facing?
So when it comes to innovation, I look at Nigeria in particular. It's the market I'm most familiar with. I'm Nigerian, of course, born and raised in Nigeria. I've supported startup in Kenya, and seen the growth in Rwanda. Um, I pay attention to what is happening, but I speak for Nigeria and what the supposed challenges are for innovation. Uh, so the thing is, what exactly do we call innovation? What do we decide as being innovative? In my view, there's not a lot of innovation that should be done in Nigeria or even most of Africa. So I think some of the challenges I would say as per innovation, or if we want to call them challenges, is that we forget the environment that we are operating in. We forget to, let no say we forget, we, I think I would actually say forget. So we forget that we are working in Nigeria, we're working in Africa. You're dealing with a large population. There's a diminishing, there's a reduced purchasing power. There's a diverse literacy is not just English alone, it's multiple languages, what could be a lingua franca in the North, Hausa. So I think one of the challenges, or just to get back to the question, what the challenges on innovation is for startups here is it seems we're copying hook, line, and sinker what's happening in the West and trying to just replicate it here, right? We're not necessarily thinking about simple as banks. And I like to think as technology as something very simple. It doesn't have to be too too detailed. I like to think of it as some simple application that can just ease the existing process. Let's talk about something as simple as an ATM machine. Up until I think earlier this year or last year, you could barely find Hausa language or local languages in some of these on some of these machines to withdraw. It's not. Then it begs the question: what is literacy? Is it just English alone, or are we talking about multiple languages? Can people read in Hausa, Igbo, and they can't read in English? How do we build for that? Now, I think that those are some. So Nigeria is very fragmented, whereas when you think of global solutions, they build one and you roll out to millions of people. But because of our peculiarities, you have to be very, you have to think through what you're building. So innovation here, the challenges for me, what I see as a challenge for startups in on innovation is we need to think through some of the problems clearly, move beyond that Lagos axis, right? Once you talk of ag tech, the way it's adopted maybe in Lagos will be very different from a Kano person. When you talk about education, you can use maybe a southeastern model to apply somewhere in Zamfara because the realities are different. It doesn't mean certain solutions don't exist. It's just we need to understand the environment very clearly. And then when we decide we want to replicate existing global solutions, we need to now start to tweak them. So on the Nigeria perspective, Nigeria is a challenging environment to operate in. It's challenging. You're optimizing for sustainability, so you need people that have money. So yes, it's a difficult terrain to work in.
Well, you mentioned the fact that you've had experiences working with I believe startups in other parts of Africa like Rwanda and Senegal, and Kenya, right? So I was going to, like, in your own opinion, do you feel like some of the cultural differences that we have between maybe Nigeria and all those other African countries, do you feel like they have a way of influencing business practices and innovation?
So just to clarify, the work I did in Senegal and Rwanda was around policy. So not particularly working startup. Working in startups was in Kenya and supporting another in Egypt. So on the cultural differences, I use Egypt for an example. I don't know. I worked or supported some startups there, and I think one of the things I did observe was it could be because of the selection or the quality of startups we worked with, but there was just a high attention for detail. They were particular about excellence, the quality of work you gave it. They were like Nigerians in a way, but the quality of work was very high. This is not to disparage Nigerians. I just noticed, this was across all of the startups. This is not to disparage Nigerians. So I just noticed that. I thought it was interesting. Um, I also noticed, by the way, for Nigeria, one thing I think I do like, despite the fact it's not still employed, there's actually a very high number of women in the space. It's very impressive when you start to look outside the space. Uh, when you start looking at other countries, it's not really the same. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it's not entirely the same. Culturally, there's not that much. Everybody's trying to do what they can to stay afloat. The struggles are still the same. Let's say those in Rwanda have more clear government and policy guidelines. It's very straightforward. The terms of engagement or the rules of engagement are clear. You're not having a back and forth as to what policy or what government or regulation is or isn't as regards how you operate. Also, the penalties or consequences for actions do exist and clearly stated. So you have a higher trust in those societies. So I think that's for the observation in Rwanda, for instance. I think that's just what I would say. But at the core, for me, I look at it from the business angle, right? It's the same problem across most of Africa. It's a tough market to operate in. The fragmentation is high. Policy wise, you have more unclear rules than clear rules, and there's just poor people. So you just need to keep figuring out how to make that money. If not, your business will die.
Yeah, so based on what you've stated, like in your opinion, you feel government policies have a huge role to play in helping startups to grow or to thrive?
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. I myself going into public sector, aside, just the general interest, is just that observation. Let's see the simple case of Go-Kada in Lagos. It was just one policy that wiped out the entire operations, right?
Oh.
You go to policy is very important. You go to somewhere. Well, the last time I was in Rwanda, there was neither Bolt nor Uber. They have their local transportation ride sharing platform. I don't know if the case has changed right now. You come to the finance sector, right? You come to fintech sector. What is the regulatory body that makes it easy for these fintech providers to operate? Are you talking SEC, the SEC, or you're talking CBN, which is a better regulatory body? What license do you want to have? Is it possible if you're requested to have a 250 million naira deposit? Of course, there are the pros and the cons before you can get certain licenses. For instance, what does that mean? How does that limit access or the speed or the rate of growth if that amount of capital is tied down? Right now, we have the Nigeria Startup Act, and there's also room for funding. What policy would you say is in place for startups to access funding through the Nigerian government? So I'm not just saying it is a fact. America's economy, yes, startups do grow, but the government has been extremely critical in the growth of these startups. You can't do it alone. You cannot do it alone, and the difference is often clear. It could be research funding, policy support, partnering, just leveraging. So, just leveraging existing infrastructure and scale of government. If one is able to do that, then you're going to see significant growth. So policy, I don't even say, I think anybody in sector understands that. So the conversation usually goes, government should step aside, just don't do anything, because once you try to do something, you break it, which is understandable. So the question is, what are the things specifically we don't want government to supposedly do? I'm government now because I still work in government, right? So those questions come on. What are the things specifically that startups face a challenge? Because sometimes when the government tries to come in, it becomes muddled. It becomes more difficult. You're now dealing with regulations or meeting certain criteria as against focusing on the business. Unfortunately, government cannot just step aside. So the question is, how do we co-create policies or solutions that is beneficial or creates a very strong enabling environment? I know this conversation is going deep into government. It's what my core is, because if those enabling environments don't exist, it's only a matter of time before you realize that you're, in sinking sand. It's just a matter of time before you're done. Rwanda is the easiest, I think, after Mauritius. Mauritius, one of the easiest places to do business, to set up business. It's a very small, not even bigger than Kaduna, less than 45,000 square kilometers thereabouts, if I'm not mistaken. And the amount of funding or investment they get per capita, I think, is impressive. And it's down to just one thing: very clear government stance on investment, on innovation, on funding, on supporting business. All right. The market is not huge. How many people are there? It's a very small country. The purchasing power is not high. But if it's clear, what's the likelihood of setting up in Rwanda as a base? So it's all about that. There's a lot of work that can be done. There's a lot of prospect, but just coming back to your question, policy is extremely important.
Oh, you've been part of the 114 million euro, pounds challenge, right? Fund
The
for youth
CFY,
employment. Yeah.
yeah.
Do you mind telling us a little about the program or the challenge and how it has helped to enhance youth employment?
So it's a challenge fund for youth employment, and it was provided by the Dutch Foreign Office to support businesses that had the capacity to. Some businesses can scale without much hiring. That's where you have technology, tech startups. It's all about software. Once it's built completely, you're largely providing support. The more people use a platform, it doesn't translate to more people getting hired. But this particular fund was targeted to the opposite: businesses that scaled, startups that scaled, and also will require people on board for that expansion to happen. So it leaned. There are many kinds of businesses, but you'd find it leaning more towards manufacturing businesses. So how it has supported youth employment, pretty much what happens is once you make a submission and we think that funding the business makes it possible, like with that additional funding and technical support we provide, that your business is going to expand, then we're able to inject that amount of money into the fund, into your business, so that more people can get employed. It's not that was one particular project I enjoyed, specifically for the fact that we were dealing with the real sector. We're dealing with people that most of them were doing cash, so there was consistent, there was cash inflow. You're talking blue collar jobs, individuals that may not usually benefit from the VC conversations because they're not tech enabled. You're talking, in addition to that, you're even suggesting the infusion of technological solutions just to improve operations a bit. So has it helped employment? It's a long-term, these are long-term projects. This was it was extended to 6 years. It was a 5, 6 year project. The entire funding process from review would take up to about 7 to 8 months. So some have been productive, but I think Nigeria had only 2 cycles. That's for Nigeria. Egypt was a very interesting cycle. Scale, they had the huge manufacturing capacity. So I particularly enjoy this because I'm keen on manufacturing in order to augment the technology solutions that we will build. So yes, jobs have certainly been created. You have relatively unexposed real sector companies that are now thinking on a very large scale. So that has happened.
Wow. So as a woman in technology and leadership, like what were some of the challenges you faced and how have you been able to overcome them?
I'm a woman in tech. I'm a woman in golf tech, I think. But
Okay.
yeah, so what are the challenges I faced? I can't think of any in particular. I think it would be me. I think I was my limiting factor at any point. I think the initial challenge I would say was just trying to identify what it was, get clarity on what it is one wants to do. Because of how I think when I started, I don't think the conversation was as trite as it is now. Almost every corner you turn is get into tech, do tech, do tech, do tech, do tech. The world is big. There's so many opportunities and many things that can be done. Everyone's jumping into the startup trend, despite the fact that statistically the odds are not in your favor, right? These conversations are so I'd say initially my challenge was trying to figure out what it is I wanted to do. I knew I was interested in public sector. I knew I was interested in governance. I studied law for my undergrad degree, but the issue was figuring out what exactly or where exactly I wanted to be. So I started off programming. I did digital marketing. I did some consulting. Actually, I did some consulting. Actually, I still do consulting actually independently up until I got into government. Then took a break and all of that. So I explored different. I did teaching, just trying to figure out what it is, right? I would say I was good at marketing. I understood it, but it was a place I realized I didn't want to be in. So for me, I think challenge was just trying to find what it is that one wants to do. And I don't think that is relegated to just me being a woman. I think it's more of a human thing. And then when I decided I wanted to be in public sector, it wasn't just general public. I wanted to be at that intersection between supporting technology businesses and uh, uh, doing that at a scale, at the governance scale. So fortunately, there's a digital economy aspect of government, and it's an opportunity to just see how much work one can just do. So I would say challenge was just identifying what one wants to do. As per a woman in tech, I don't know. I think maybe when you go for conferences and meetings, you're very aware if there's not a lot of women. It's improving. I guess it takes time. But beyond that, I don't think there's anything peculiar to me being a woman that has made it too difficult to navigate. I think everything's surmountable.
So you feel there's no any form of disparity between whether you're a man in tech or a woman in tech, like we both face similar challenges.
I can't say we both. I'm saying for me, I can speak for myself, and I guess because my experiences have been really good, I've worked with
Mm-hmm.
people that are supportive, both for men and women. So I can't particularly say, I can't speak to that. I think the challenge is that there's not a lot of women, and it's a
Yeah.
growing, it's something that is improving every day. So it's not like it's a declining number, but it's a growing number, right? The ratio may be 4 to 1, 3 to 1. Okay. But it's definitely improving. But as per challenges, particularly, I can't. There's none that comes to mind. If we want to do something, it's just to go ahead and do it. The fact that I'm a woman hasn't. It's not really been a thought. It's never been top of mind for me.
But what advice would you give like ladies out there who are aspiring to take up leadership role in the tech industry?
I think it helps to gain clarity, but beyond that, it like all things, you need to know your work and don't necessarily second guess. Truth is, men are more confident, even those that may not know as much as a woman does. Women are usually more reserved, and you see that doubt uh, come to the fore in the course of their work. So I'd encourage, if take a shot, take risks, um, aim if there's nothing wrong, aim significantly higher than what you imagine. There's no harm in that. What women tend to do, I think I also do it, is just understate what it is that we are doing. We're very casual with our work and our output because we think it's normal, but our male counterpart will be able to discuss this. They'll be very vocal. But the main thing is you just need to know your work and do the work well. That's it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the startup ecosystem here in
Yeah.
Nigeria. You know, some of the policies that are in place. You mentioned a startup in Lagos that got wiped out because of a policy. Yeah,
Go
yeah, exactly. And more startups are still coming up. And there are a lot of challenges that they will face because of some policies that are out there that may not favor them. And I don't think that could be enough reason for people to just stop building their startups, because we really need more startups to fight unemployment rates and all those other challenges that we face as an economically. So, like, I was just trying to seek your what advice, since you're in the government and in tech, what advice would you give people that are trying to build their startups? I mean, amidst the policy challenges, like how do you think they can approach? Yeah.
So from the policy, why I'm finding it a bit, it's not a very straightforward response, because the policy is just one aspect of it. So there's one thing. Firstly, policies are not very well developed. I think unlike the EU, where they're very huge, the other part of the world, innovation moves faster than policy. So you have policy catching up, being retroactive at times. So on one part, it depends on the scale of your business. I think the first thing is to understand what sector people are working in. Someone who is great at programming comes up with an idea and says they want to build a financial solution. Now, it depends. For fintech, there are different kinds, those in the insurance, pension, savings, lending. Like I said, tech is just an improvement. But fundamentally, if you're working largely in a financial solution, what you're doing is working in regulations. The entire financial space is regulated. So if you as a programmer or a technical person comes up with a financial solution or an idea, I'm just using this instance to start off, you need to find someone legal or someone familiar with policy and government. You need to understand the rules governing how that sector operates. There are certain other areas that are a bit more lax. Maybe, I don't want to say entirely lax, let's say logistics. If you're not doing interstate logistics, if you're just operating within a state, then you want to understand, are there taxes on certain kinds of vehicles or tools? So I think the first step would be truly understanding that what it is you're building is not just tech. All right, it fits, there are existing rules that govern how old players do it. If DHL has been working, although DHL has been working, do you think there are rules that they follow or play by. If God is good motors or Dangote keeps moving trucks in between. It's still logistics. The question is, while you're trying to do that on a very granular scale, are there existing rules that have been put in place to guide how these things operate? Now, these rules may be tough, make the business more expensive to run. Now, the first part is for you to be able to survive, you need to understand that aspect. And then I think the second part is you being proactive in the sense that you want to start having those conversations with those in government, right? So for me, I have some understanding of how businesses operate, understand to an extent what some of the problems are when solutions are being built, when they're being implemented. And now as I work in government, when ideas or policy solutions are being designed, I can say this will not, or this will make that sector thrive. That's great. That's a great advantage of having people that have been in the industry come to the government side, right? Because sometimes you hear policy and the comment is, how did these people think of it? I'm these people because I'm non-government, right? How was this? How can you charge these people? We're suffering. How can you remove this? We're suffering. Why is there a tax on this? We're suffering, right? So when you have, so the first step or the first thing I would say is you need to understand how people that were working without tech were operating. Some people say they cut ticket. That's for those in Lagos. You go here, you must collect one ticket. The what's it called? The park guys must cut ticket for you to pass within. So you have to first of all understand, is there any understanding between the government and those guys? You don't have to agree yet. What that does is it prevents you from being blindsided. You don't come up one day and they're like, oh, you haven't paid this, you've been operating for so long, right? That also helps you from not being blindsided. You understand, or you start to think about how you want to charge. Because if people are used to 10 naira per kilometer and one day you just said it's 15 naira because you forgot some people, that business starts to die from that period. So the first thing, you need to understand what existing rules, laws, policies guide that space you're playing in. Financial solution, logistics solution, food or partnerships, food solutions, whatever sector it is, whatever tech, ag tech, whatever tech that you want to layer on it. Because what you're doing, tech is an enabler. Those things, everything you're solving for largely works one way or the other. What tech does is it makes it possible to scale. So you need to understand that sector. And then the second thing you need to do is be proactive. All right, find out who are the policy makers. What are they doing? How can you come in? It's work. I'm not going to lie to you, it's work. If you have people that are not very open-minded regulating your sector, it's difficult, but you need to start that conversation so that the policies that are being made are tailored towards ensuring that such sector can grow and improve or thrive. So I think those are two ways I could just put it at that. But beyond, the policy aspect, let's just talk about startups. And why I don't want to dwell so heavily on that is because these are all, I would say these are largely reactive. You want something maybe more proactive, something that you want to encourage or incentivize certain behavior so that certain economic outcome or output is achieved. So that's also another. But beyond, the policy part, being able to thrive as a business or as a startup. Everybody calls themselves a startup these days, but not everything is a startup. Some are just businesses with layering tech, right? And doesn't automatically translate to a startup, right? Growth is the determinant. The ability to scale is determinant. So beyond that, you just need to find customers. You need to find people willing to pay for that solution that you are building. And that's how you survive, because 1 million government policies will not be a substitute for, a business without customers.
Yeah, I agree with you. To wrap up this podcast, I would like to know, do you feel like the government are aware of some of the policies that are in place that have been a challenge to startups? And do you feel like there are
measures in place that trying to lighten up the burden that some of these policies are bringing on startups? Like, if you just could throw a quick light on that.
Is the government aware of the problems? Absolutely. Are they trying to lighten the burden? I'm just being very simple with the response. Absolutely. The previous Minister of Digital Economy, Dr. Pantami, also with the NITSTA, National IT Development Agency, were very actively involved with engaging the ecosystem. The current minister, Dr. Bosun Tijani, is an industry player, founder of CC Hub. I'm just throwing this out. We may not be there yet, but as of the last administration, there was a Nigeria Startup Act that was Nigeria Startup Bill that became an act. Now we're at the phase where what we're trying to do is make sure is the implementation. There are interesting ideas in it. There's always room for improvement in anything. That's why you need that collaboration, co-creation space. But we're at the phase where we're trying to implement that. How do you activate the funds that are available? How do you encourage startups to register locally because of now everyone is doing a US or a Delaware registration, which means all the IP will be there. Maybe some tax will be lost there. Basically, you are now in the American system. So we're at the phase where we're looking at implementation of the Startup Act. It takes time, but just going to your question, yes, there is, for this sector, there is an awareness of existing problems because we now have people who have engaged with the ecosystem. They are looking to co-create and collaborate with players. And everyone's working towards making that process more fluid. There'll always be gaps because the public sector process is different from the pace or speed at which startups operate. So yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I'm really glad to know that, and I hope to see over time that startups continue to thrive in this part of the world.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for sharing your insights. I don't know if you have any parting words.
Parting words. No. No. So thank you for having me. Thank you. I know your conversation draws heavily on startups, and I've just brought a government angle, and I try to just lean heavily on that. But for those building startups, it's very tough. It's a tough environment to operate, tough macroeconomic realities. But one just has to keep pushing. So good luck to everyone out there, and all the best. And again, if they haven't, or you haven't, if anyone's listening, haven't considered engaging with the government, give it a shot. They're listening. People solve problems they are aware of. And if you think a problem is not being solved, try and bring it to their notice, bring it to public sector notice. I'm always keen on, getting engaged on the public sector side. So that's the biggest skill. Government is the biggest skill for anything. And we need those collaboration for the startups to be able to do more. So that's it. Thank you so much, Chato, for having me this morning. It was lovely to chat with you. I know it's hurried, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah. See you next time.
All right, cheers.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, bye. All right, bye.
And that concludes the end of another episode of the Digza podcast. I hope you've learned a lot. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comment section, like the video, and most importantly, don't forget to subscribe. See you on the next episode.